All right, so this is kind of an explanation of how this auto splitter is set up. If you have any ideas about how to make it better or anything like that, please share and hopefully this can be improved upon. But for now, I'll kind of explain what's going on. All this information is on that GitHub page for the auto splitter itself. But basically, how the file is set up is the first bit before the first underscore is just the way to sort the images. It's an alphanumerical system, so that's why there's the numbers and the letters. The next group is the similarity threshold, and so when the live similarity goes above this value, the program hits your split key, or in this case, the pause key, and moves to the next split image. So if the images are, close enough to being the same with the threshold, then it splits. If the threshold limit is set too high, then you potentially can't have the image compared correctly. And if it's set too low, it could split at a different image that kind of looks the same, but isn't what you're hoping to split at. So 0.9 is a pretty good value, and what I'll usually use. You may have to raise or lower it depending on if your timer is pausing before or after you need it to. But 0.9 should be a pretty good number. The next number in the brackets is your pause time, and this is the time in seconds that the program stops comparison after a split. So in a second, I'll show you what that means and why it's useful, but we have a lot of black screens involved in this auto splitter, so you can't just go immediately from black screen to black screen. You need a bit of a buffer in between to allow for, in this case, like the water background load screen to go into the lighthouse or into a chapter. So that's your little buffer in between the black screens. So you got to get to that point or the auto splitter activates again. The next little bit of the file name in the, I don't know what even they're called, the little wacky brackets, is either a D or a P. A D stands for a dummy split image, and I'll explain that in a second. And a P is for the pause function of the timer. So we'll start the video up. So we're going along, and the first image is going to be a dummy image. So it'll hopefully activate the auto splitter around this area. And so that will move the auto splitter. It will start to look for this file, which is also a dummy split. And that will be the last black screen before the chapter exit, or that little cutscene before the chapter exit. So 001B is that black screen right there. And then that brings us to 002, which will actually be the final black screen. And this is why it has a P. So it's going to pause the timer as you enter the lighthouse. So 002 should activate. Give it a second. It activates right there. 003 will be when you actually see the Yarnies again in the lighthouse and starts that intro cutscene into the lighthouse. So 002 has a pretty high threshold because it's a black screen. You want it to be as close to fully black. You don't want to pause a little early or a little late. And then has a 2.5 second buffer or pause time for this one to get from this black screen to that screen. So you need a little bit of time, and then you need to activate the next one before this black screen occurs. So again, it's covered in the other bit of the video, but that's what these numbers are for. And so this is your black screen that activates number 3 here, and that unpauses the timer as you get into the lighthouse. So then the next picture it's going to be comparing against is this screen, which I'm going to fast forward a bit. So this screen is a dummy split for about right here, which activates and then lets the splitter know that the next black screen it comes across, which is 005, to get into chapter 2 is when it pauses the timer. So that's when it's going to pause. That's when it activates 005. we get a little bit of a 2-second buffer time because we got to get to this screen first before we get to the next black screen. So then the next split 006 is ready to go once we hit this next black screen. Eventually, oh yeah, this is the really long one. And this is what brings us into chapter 2 and starts the cutscene. So that's what activates 006 to unpause the pause that was from 005. That's when that activates. And then that brings you up to 007, which is at the end of chapter 2. And that's why this dummy split is here, because there's so many, deaths or just transitions that have the black screen in chapter 2 that we need a dummy image to let the Autosplitter know, hey, the next black screen you see is going to be when the pause needs to happen with the timer. So that brings us all the way to the end of chapter 2. So we've made it all the way to chapter 2, made it all the way through to the end, and that's when 007, that dummy split, is going to come into play. So once we get into the final, very last little cutscene bit, where there's no black screens in between here and the chapter exit, that's where we have our dummy split. And so that will activate somewhere around in here, about where those little pieces start. So that activates 7, and then it loads up 008 as our next split, and that's got the long pause time. So that will be once we enter the portal and it starts the black screen to go back into the lighthouse. So we hop in there, and then this will be right there is when 008 activates. There's a 4-second kind of a wait. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then that is when 009 will be the next split, and will be when right there we exit back into the lighthouse. Now this is a dummy split because this is the quit and continue file or folder. So this is only a dummy split. So that sets up for the quit and continue screen, or the continue or start a new game screen, which is what we exit out to right here. So that's when that activates 010, and then that loads up the next black screen, which will unpause the timer once we get back into the lighthouse. So it unpauses the timer there, activates 011A, and then that brings us into the gameplay again. The next screen, since we have to go up the elevator, is going to be 011B, and that's just a dummy split because we get that one screen, the one black screen in between our other two black screens. So we get the activation there, and that's the dummy, and then that lets us know that the next screen will be the pause to get into chapter 3, which is 012A. So 012A and 012B both have the pause flag right there at the end, and then that allows the auto splitter. So that's 012A activates there, pauses the timer. We get this little buffer. We got a 2-second buffer for this screen, and then that brings us to 012B that activates on that black screen and brings us into chapter 3. And this kind of cycle of black screens continues all the way through the rest of the run, the rest of the game. And if the auto splitter is set up with correct pause buffer times and the thresholds match up and don't get screwed, then it should work. You may have to adjust the threshold or the pause times accordingly with how fast your game loads. But otherwise, there shouldn't be too much that you have to adjust. The continue and start a new game screen. Where is it? Here. For PC and PS4, I was capturing just straight from the game itself. So I think they should work for PC and like PS4 and Xbox. Switch, you may have to capture your own continue and start new game screen. But if you lowered that threshold, it might work as well. It's something you might have to play around with, and I can help you out if you need some help. But that's basically what this auto splitter is doing. So, yeah. All right, so since this auto splitter is based pretty much on recognizing the black screens in and around the loading transitions between chapters in the lighthouse. We can go ahead and just make sure everything's working fine. We'll start up chapter 1, get towards the end, just go ahead and start the auto splitter. So it's set up right now. This first dummy image just kind of lets the auto splitter know that the next black screen isn't where it needs to pause, but it's also a dummy image for the auto splitter. So once that triggers, the auto splitter will know that the next black screen, which is us exiting chapter 1 going into the lighthouse, is when it actually needs to pause the timer. So hopefully this should pause once we exit chapter 1. Good. We'll give a little bit of a buffer so we get the lighthouse water background screen enough time that the next black screen that triggers the pause to unpause, it works. So now that we've unpaused into the lighthouse, the next kind of dummy split will be this portal that you see, and then that will let the auto splitter know that the next black screen it sees will be time to pause again as we enter chapter 2 from the lighthouse. And then once the intro cutscene for chapter 2 starts, the timer should unpause with that next black screen. So if this works, then the dummy split will activate now. Good. And then that loads up the black screen. So once we enter chapter 2, it should pause the timer here. We get a little bit of a pause buffer time. And then I think this is the really slow chapter 2 intro, like water background load screen. So it might be a few seconds. But once we finally get to that chapter 2 intro, it should unpause again and we should be good to go. Yep. All right. And then we can do the same thing at the end of chapter 2. All right, so we can do the same thing at the end of chapter 2 to make sure the quit and continue section of this auto splitter is working correctly. So we'll make our way to the end of chapter 2, have the auto splitter going. The auto splitter is going to be looking for this dummy split, and then that will transition so that the next black screen it sees again will be the start of the pause. Okay, so that worked. So once we exit chapter 2 and that first black screen, it should pause the timer. Okay. And then how the quit and continue setup is it's going to look for the first black screen as a dummy, the quit and continue main menu screen as another dummy, and then the final black screen back into the lighthouse as your unpause time. There's a dummy split for the black screen once you go up the elevator, and then finally, once again, you have the pause black screen entering into chapter 3. And it should unpause once you get that cutscene. There you go. So it's working.